You sound good. You can switch back off if you like, and we'll be getting started in a minute.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it, Marianne.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Mathis. For Mayor Cole, how are you? You need to unmute.
Good
There
morning.
you go. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Good morning, everyone.
Are you sitting in for the mayor today, or are you setting up for him?
Mayor Cole will be joining the meeting also.
Miss Jacinta, how are you?
Doing fine, Mayor McDonald. How are you?
Oh, I'm as always, I'm taller on Zoom. So happy to be here.
Good things come in small packages.
Yeah, that's the good news. I fit everywhere.
Marianne, Virginia, this is Alex. Does this mic sound better? I just changed microphones.
You do sound
Yes.
better, Alex.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Alex, good meeting with the working group the other day. I appreciate the work y'all are doing.
Glad you're able to attend. Thank you.
Okay, we got about a few more minutes before we start. We are looking for 2 more before we would have a quorum, but we would be able to get started with this meeting since it is a workshop.
Virginia, I just texted John Dallas about doing the Pledge of Allegiance.
You're supposed to give me more notice than that, Dale McDonald.
I know. I thought I'd already gotten your RSVP.
I have to study.
So I was good.
I have to study for that.
No, that's my line.
Mr. Chairman, we're streaming live on YouTube, and we will be ready to get started in one minute. Apple time says 2, but my computer says 1. I see that we're joined by Commissioner Jordan Smith. Got a good visual on you. Can you do an audio check, please? Commissioner Smith, are you able to speak?
Yes.
Okay, great. Gotcha.
Hey,
Thank you.
congratulations, Jordan.
I see that Randy Knight from the City of Winter Park has joined us. Randy, can you do an audio check, please?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Chairman, it is now 9:30. We are streaming live on YouTube, and you can get started at any time now.
All right. Thank you, Miss Virginia. Okay. Welcome to this virtual MetroPlan Orlando MAC meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Dale McDonald. I'm the mayor of Maitland, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We also have a team of folks working to ensure this meeting runs smoothly. Today's meeting was advertised on MetroPlan Orlando's website and social media, as well as through targeted emails. Now, Florida's Sunshine Law requires a quorum to be physically present in the room for a government meeting. Now, Governor DeSantis has suspended this requirement in an executive order allowing the government boards to conduct business using virtual meetings. Now, this order expired October 31st, so this meeting is being held in a workshop format. Now, staff will further explain what this means in just a moment. Mayor Dallas, if you might head us toward the pledge.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you, John. At today's meeting, we'll keep microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak. And we'll use the raise hands feature to participate in discussion. Now, there are two public comment points in the meeting. Members of the public who want to speak will use the raise hands feature found in the participants tab. If attending by phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. When you're called upon, your microphone will be temporarily unmuted by staff and will ask you to state your name and contact information for the record. Now, we've also accepted comments via email and phone message before the meeting. The guidelines for public comments are posted at metroplanorlando.org/virtual meetings. Now, public comments received before the meeting will be read by staff at the conclusion of the meeting. We want this and all future online meetings to be accessible to all. Now, participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact MetroPlan Orlando. I don't have any additional comments, so at this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Virginia Whittington of MetroPlan Orlando staff for agenda review.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members and all those that are joining us online. Thank you for working with us as we conduct these virtual meetings. We appreciate your patience and your understanding. Based on the direction our board gave at their September meeting, this meeting is being held as a virtual workshop in which action items that are being advanced to the MetroPlan Orlando board will be reviewed and discussed here, but no formal action will be taken. The board's actions on these items will be ratified at a future meeting that is in person. The format is subject to change, of course, if the governor issues another executive order. Again, we thank you for your flexibility during this time. As the chairman mentioned, we'll be using the raise hand feature to recognize committee members during the meeting and to call on members of the public during the public comment time. If you've joined us on the phone only without the video screen, please use *6 to mute and unmute your line, or please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so that the meeting hosts can see that you wish to be recognized. You'll also see that there's a chat feature on your toolbar. This communicates with all panelists in this meeting, which includes the committee members, staff, and the presenters. So we ask that you please only use this if you're having technical difficulties or if you need assistance. A full record of the chat comments will be included with the public record for this meeting. I'd like to welcome this morning Councilmember Judith Smith. She's here representing Mayor Megan Sladek today. I'd also like to report to you that we have two new MAC members who'll be joining us at a future meeting. Mayor David Henson, City of Castleberry, and Mayor Richard Drummond with the City of Longwood. We're working to get on their calendars for an onboarding meeting and hope to do that before the next MAC meeting. Mr. Chairman, that completes my announcements for this morning. There are no changes to the agenda, and I see that all of the presenters are present this morning. So with your permission, I'd like to ask Kathy Goldfarb to call the roll for the record. And again, no action items will be on this agenda. So we would be able to move forward even if we did not have a quorum present.
I'll ask all committee members to please go ahead and unmute yourselves now for the roll call, and you can go on mute again after your name is called. Please make sure your video is on if possible so we can confirm it's you. You'll find the unmute and video buttons on the bottom left side of your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please say here or present when your name is called. Cole? Dallas?
Here.
Drummond?
Here.
Versner? Foraker?
Present.
Lacey? Knight?
Here.
McDonald?
Here.
McMullen? Smith? Jordan?
Here.
O'Brien? Smith Judith?
Present.
That concludes the roll call.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may note for the record that I did receive information from Commissioner McMullen that he will be joining us a little late this morning.
And we'll be glad to have Joe when he can get with us. Okay. Any items for, we have 3 items for review and or discussion today. Do we have our first item or the minutes of our last meeting, which are at tab 1 on your agenda packets? I hope you've all had a chance to review them. Are there any corrections or revisions that need to be brought to the staff's attention? Hearing none. As a reminder, this will be brought back for formal approval at a future in-person meeting. Now, our next item is a review of the FDOT amendment to fiscal year 2020, 2021 through 2024, 25 TIP.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of
Hey,
the committee.
Keith.
This amendment includes 5 projects. 2 of these are in Seminole County. One of those replaces state funds with local funds for the design of a resurfacing project on State Road 436 in Altamont Springs. And then the other replaces federal SU funds with local funds for the design of the Longwood South pedestrian corridor. And then we have 3 new railroad crossing safety projects that are being added in South Orange County. And you all have the information on this in tab 2 in your packets. So with that, I'll open it up and see if there's any questions.
Any questions, anybody? Hearing none. Thank you, Keith. So again, no other questions of Mr. Caskey?
There are no raised hands at this time, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Now our next item will be the proposed 2021 board committee meeting schedule.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman again, and members. At your agenda tab 3, you'll find the proposed meeting schedule for 2021. There's only one thing that I need to call attention to with regard to the Municipal Advisory Committee, and that is that usually you would have the month of July off because it typically comes close to the 4th of July, but this year's upcoming year's meeting is July 8th. And so you have an extra meeting on your calendar, and we ask that you would note all of these meetings. This full schedule will be presented to the MetroPlan Orlando Board on November 18th for approval.
All right, any questions or comments?
I don't see any hands.
All right, thank you, Miss Virginia. Okay, let's move forward to our presentations and status updates. Now we have a total of 3 presentations on today's agenda. Now again, please use the raise hands function to be recognized if you want to ask a question, and it's okay to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation to indicate that you want to ask a question, but we will hold all questions until the presentation ends. If you're having audio issues, you can type your questions into the chat box, and Miss Virginia will relay your question. Okay. Miss Cynthia, you're on.
Thanks, Mayor. And yes, we do encourage questions, so please feel free to raise those hands. And as a reminder, you can find that button in if you click on participants on your Zoom toolbar, you'll find raise hand at the bottom of that window. So last time that I was with you at your last meeting, I talked to you a little bit about how we had changed our approach to community outreach for our 2045 plan during the pandemic. And I went into detail on some of the feedback that we had received from the public. So today, we actually have a draft 2045 plan for you. So you'll be hearing a few presentations today on different aspects of that plan. And I will be talking to you about how we've taken the input that we've gotten from the public and how that has actually shaped the technical side of the plan. Next slide, please. So to remind you a little bit of our timeline and kind of how we got here, we started outreach for the 2045 plan about a year ago. And so it has continued all through this year. And now we're actually in the public comment period. So our comment period on the draft plan opened on October 16th. It will remain open through November 20th. And I will talk a little later in the presentation on all the different ways that the public can comment on the plan. And then our last stop really on this timeline is when the MetroPlan Orlando Board actually adopts the 2045 plan, and that is going to be happening at their meeting on December 9th. So we are nearly to the finish line. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share some key outreach results for you, and these statistics that I'm sharing go through the end of September. We'll be updating these after adoption when we actually have the full picture of these last couple of months of outreach. But one thing that's really important to us when we are in the process of updating our metropolitan transportation plan is that we want to take the opportunity to educate people on how transportation planning works. MetroPlan Orlando is by no means a household name, and transportation is very complex. So it's not a lot of people know exactly how the planning process works. So education and raising awareness of the process is always a big goal for us when we're doing community outreach. So we tracked the number of significant interactions that we had with folks, opportunities where we actually had a chance to speak with them, and where they were able to take in messages about the long range plan. So whether they attended one of our events or one of our webinars online, or watched a video, or perhaps they spent some time on our website browsing some of our documents there. These were what we call our teachable moments about the 2045 plan. And we had more than 10,000 of those that we tracked throughout our process. As far as folks who gave direct input to the plan, we had just over 1,800. So either they took a survey or a poll during one of our webinar presentations. Of course, we still have that direct input coming in through our public comment period. So that number will be going up. And one of our board's emphasis areas is to make sure that we are reaching out to future generations. So youth outreach was something that we wanted to really kick into high gear for this plan. And as you've seen in previous meetings, we created a special new activity books for our young ones. And so nearly 1,000 youths in Central Florida received those activity books. So we're really excited about those. If you ever have events coming up where you will have kind of elementary, middle school aged kids, please let us know. We'll be happy to provide some of those activity books to you for use in those different events. And then, of course, we're really active on social media. And since most things seem to be digital these days, this is a great way to reach people. So we do track a lot of those statistics. So the good news is that at the beginning of this process, we created a plan for outreach and we set several objectives for ourselves, and we are on track to meet all of these objectives despite the pandemic. So we're proud of that. Next slide, please. And to remind you a little bit about what we heard from the public, and for some of the members that are with us today that might not have been at previous meetings, we heard some loud and clear, some specific things from the public. First of all, we have 5 goals that we set for the 2045 plan. And when we presented these to members of the public and asked them to rank the goals, we wanted to get an idea of, what is most important to them. They had a really hard time with this. And so the results that we got back from our surveying showed us that people think that all of those goals are equally important for the 2045 plan. And we did see a little bit of change pre-pandemic and post-pandemic with what people considered to be the top most important goal to them. And so before the pandemic, we were seeing access and connectivity top to the list. And then after the pandemic, we saw investment and economy and public health and environment. Those two areas top the list. So that is not really surprising considering the current state of things at the moment. And when we asked about what changes people wanted to see to the transportation system, so the exact question was, what do you think will make the biggest change in the transportation system over the next 20 years? We heard loud and clear, top 3 things were first, use technology, specifically smart traffic signals to help manage congestion. And the other 2 in our kind of top 3 items were related to public transportation. So one was increasing the frequency of service, so more public transportation that goes to more places. And then the third item was to improve those first and last mile connections to transit. So people wanted to more easily get from their home to the transit system or from the transit system to their final destination. So we heard that loud and clear, and that remained the same really before the pandemic and throughout the pandemic. So people still want to see the same types of fixes long-term to the transportation system. Next slide. So how did we use this input? Well, we actually made sure that the public input that we were receiving was directly feeding into our technical process. And so I've been with MetroPlan for quite a while, and this is the 3rd long-range plan that I've worked on. And we've always considered public input and sought public input in the process. But I really believe that this plan, more than any of the previous one, is really driven by that input. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of you. Early in the process, we asked you for help in reaching out to community groups and helping us identify some of those groups that we should reach out to. And you all had some wonderful suggestions and have had some really good comments for us to help guide us throughout the process. So we appreciate your feedback. So some of the ways that we took this public input and used that information to make decision. The first area is the weighting of performance measures. When we originally set out on this plan journey, we intended to actually apply some weighting to different performance measures. So we use these performance measures to score projects. We thought, maybe we want to weight a couple of the goal areas a little more heavily than the others. But when we saw the public feedback that all those goals were equally important across the board, then we decided not to weight those different performance measures. Another area is funding allocations. So we increased the amount of money set aside for projects that support the public's desired changes to the transportation system. So we have some specific funding programs for premium transit, for technology investment, for some complete streets type projects. So you'll hear a little bit more about those in detail in Alex's presentation coming up. Scenario planning. This is the first time we've ever used scenario planning in our long range process. And so you all really directly helped shape that process. You told us that we should have a version of the future that looks at, what if things aren't always so positive here in Central Florida? What if we continue to experience disruptions like we are right now? And so we created a whole new scenario in response to the feedback that we received through our committee process. And you all also helped us refine those strategies that the region should pursue in planning for the future as well. We also adjusted our technical methodology in response to a lot of the feedback that we got specifically from our tech committees as well. So all that to say, this is really a community forward plan. So we're really proud of that. Next slide. So where can you find all this information? Here is the URL. So metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan. And we would love it if you all would share this URL with your constituents. Since we are in the public comment period right now, we're definitely wanting folks to take a look at this, to review the documents, to get us some feedback. So you'll find several things on this page, and we're calling it a virtual tour of the 2045 plan. So you will find the actual plan document, what we call the cost feasible plan. That's a PDF document here. You'll find information on how to comment. You will find all the project lists that Alex will talk about in his presentation. There are separate links to all of those project lists. And you will also find the draft public participation report. So those statistics that I shared with you earlier in the presentation, there's a whole report that talks about the strategies that we use to reach our objectives. And it's an easy read. I encourage you to take a look at it. So again, metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan is where you'll find all that information. Next, please. And so there are 4 different ways that the public can comment on the plan. At that URL that I just shared with you, there is an online comment form that can be filled out. You can also send us a good old-fashioned email. On Monday, we will be having a webinar called 2045 Plan the Reveal. That's Monday, this coming Monday, November 9th at 5:30. And the registration link for that webinar is also at that URL. We will be taking live public comments during this particular program. So the program will include a presentation, a discussion with our planning experts, and then we'll be taking public comment. And then we've also set up a phone line that folks, if they don't want to type everything out, they can call and leave their comment in a voicemail format at this public comment line number. So next slide, please, Kathy. So that's all that I have for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And again, here's the URL if you need it and want to share it.
Any questions, anybody? These guys have been doing a fabulous, between Alex and Cynthia and the rest of the staff have been doing just an extraordinary job of putting this together. And they've indulged me a bit to be able to sit in on the working group, and this is great stuff. So any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see any raised hands at this time with questions, but I would like to recognize for the record that we've been joined by Mayor Eddie Cole and Mayor Drummond, Richard Drummond. They both joined the meeting.
Very good. Welcome, guys. Okay, moving on. Alex, sounds like you're on, bud.
Thank Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the MAC. Following up, after to Cynthia's presentation, we took a lot of public feedback. That was an integral part of the long range planning process. But we're at a part of the process now, and we can go to the next slide, please, where we're starting to see kind of some of the fruits of our labor. We kicked off over 2 years ago when we, began coordinating with FDOT and our local government agencies in developing future land use forecasts, to help us develop some of our quantitative models for predicting and projecting traffic volumes into the future. So a lot of our background data and understanding of existing conditions, started, 24 to 18 months ago. But we also spent a lot of time visioning, and focusing on goals and objectives, both with our strategic business plan, but also within this long-range planning process, what's most important to us as a region, no matter what. And that no matter what, phrase is important because we went through that scenario planning process that Cynthia talked about. And that really was our way of exploring alternative futures and looking at the impacts, the implications, kind of the inflection points, associated with each of those alternative futures of higher growth, lower growth, slower growth, and the impacts across the board, land use, transportation, and technology. So we took a deep dive and incorporated that into our technical analysis process. We also included, a really robust health and environmental screening. So looking at, what are those wetland and environmental stormwater impacts? How do we mitigate those, both in the long range planning process, but also short term as part of the project development process, and health as well. That was a key focus area, of this plan. We really did a regional health assessment of all of our transportation projects, and that actually did feed into the prioritization process. But we're at a part in the plan now, really between steps 4 and 5, where we have a draft cost feasible plan, and we've initiated that public comment period and that agency comment period where we're working with your staffs and other partners to review our documents and make sure that we get it right. So, as I present some of the later information and as you review some of these lists, know that during this comment period, we are, regularly receiving feedback from our local agency partners, and we're, updating project limits and descriptions and making sure that we're characterizing these projects most appropriately. We can go to the next slide, please. Which is an approach. And for many of you, you've heard me talk about this before, but I think now that we're kind of where we're at in the process, it's important to say again, previous plans, if you've been with us, long range plans really only had a couple cost feasible lists, and they focused on highway capacity projects. So really widening projects. And those were really the only projects you would explicitly see listed in our long range plan. That was not our end in mind early in our scoping process. That was not the end in mind as part of our visioning process, and the feedback that we heard from the public. We wanted more. So this plan was developed with that end in mind, needs and opportunities, to support, diverse traveler needs, to support mobility, and of course our goals and objectives, which include safety, reliability, access, health, and economy. Go to the next slide, please. So when we look at cost feasible plan development, there's the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is, this large document that looks back to the history, and looks into the future. But this is the important element. All long-range transportation plans have to be cost feasible. That is a federal requirement. And what we have here is really putting those pieces together. So we have needs, and we've developed, and you've heard me present on the different methodologies and approaches that we've taken, and very different approaches from years past. But based on those needs, based on those opportunities that we identified, we also develop cost, and that's cost by, full phase of cost. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. Based on our goals and objectives, we analyzed and prioritized those needs. We have infinite needs and desires, and we have to start getting to a finite list of fundable projects. And those fundable projects are based on our available revenues that we have. So we worked with FDOT as well as our local partners in identifying an existing revenue as well as an illustrative revenue forecast. But as part of this long-range planning process, we do adopt existing sources. I'll talk about that a little more later and the implications of that. But where we have flexibility, where we have latitude as an urbanized area and an MPO, in that number 4, we've identified our board's funding policies and has also established some additional programs to make sure that we're strategically and targeting funding our needs to accomplish those goals and objectives. And number 5, at the end of the day, like I said, we have a cost feasible list of projects, those that we can afford and spend federal and state funds on, and those unfunded needs. Still important part of the vision, but unfortunately, based on current circumstances and available financial resources, unfunded. So that's cost feasible plan in a nutshell, but we can go to the next slide, please. And I'm going to talk about these key topics briefly. And the next slide, please. So the first key topic is really existing priorities. How did we include those into this long-range planning process? MetroPlan Orlando, has 2 other core planning products. That's our prioritized project list and our transportation improvement program. And the transportation improvement program is our 5-year work program that we coordinate with DOT to see those projects funded. And then our prioritized project list goes a little farther out, up until 2040. But both of those plans were based on our last long-range plans, which were, as I mentioned, volume to capacity or very much widening focused. And because of that, we included those needs as part of our process, but we didn't necessarily grandfather those projects into the future. We weren't kind of perpetuating kind of the widening program. That's not what we heard from our board, committees, and the public. But what we are carrying forward, what we are going to continue funding, are all transportation projects in our TIP that have a project development environmental phase or beyond. So that's, projects that we've already spent money on in our TIP will move forward. So unfunded projects, unprogrammed projects, or fair game, I guess that's a good way to put it, as part of our prioritization process. So we reassessed all of our needs and came forth with the project list that I'll talk about in a moment. Something else important to acknowledge here, given our kind of pandemic times in the news that we're seeing as it relates to kind of, financial shortfalls, especially as it relates to revenue projections and really gas tax receipts. We can all acknowledge we've been driving less, as has everyone else across the probably nation and world. So there's direct and absolute impacts to the available financial resources that we're going to have in the next few years. So with that being said, we're also ensuring that all of our existing priorities will be funded. So if any funds are moved from our transportation, out of our transportation improvement program, we're maintaining those as committed projects and top priorities, irregardless, of the financial shortfalls, excuse me. So that's, just an acknowledgement that we're following through with our existing priorities, especially those that are already to be funded. We can go to the next slide. Funding policies, like I said, based on the federal projections and funds that we control as an MPO, there is some flexibility, some latitude as it relates to using, allocating, and programming those funds. Our board does have a policy to split or subdivide our urbanized area funds that we receive because we're a metropolitan planning organization. So as you see in the bottom there, 32% of our goes to complete streets type projects that are off the state highway system. We have 17% that go to pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure projects. 21% of those funds go to systems management and operations. So that's looking at, improving reliability, safety, efficiency across the network. And another 30% goes to regional transit. So what we've done as part of this long range planning process is kind of revisit these funding policies. We're carrying them forward, but also recognizing that they need a little bit of a reshaping to make sure that we can accomplish our goals and objectives and the performance targets that we've set. So with that, as part of our other arterial funds, we're actually allocating up to 10% for off-system capacity projects. So these are federal funds that are typically used for roadway widening projects on the state highway system, but we're allocating those funds to our local partners so they can follow through with the LAP program and solve some of their capacity challenges on the local network. As well, our board has a policy that up to 30% of our district dedicated revenue funds can be allocated to premium transit. And as it relates to this plan, years 2036 through 2045, we're allocating $90 million to premium transit. And I'll talk more about that later. Also, what came out of the scenario planning and public participation process was to look at other ways to implement needs. We have, and with that, as you'll see in the bottom chart, we're spending $1 million. We will be allocating $1 million a year to solving critical sidewalk gaps. That's something that we've never done in a plan before, but something that's absolutely necessary as we look at providing safe and comfortable walking facilities. We also have $1 million a year for our school mobility program, which supplements FDOT's Safe Routes to School program. And in the TSMO category, you'll see that we have our signal retiming $1 million a year. We already have that in our Unified Planning Work Program. But that's something that we want to carry forward and ensure that we have plan consistency across all of our core products, from our Metropolitan Transportation Plan to our annual operating budget. And something new, especially to this plan, and something we're excited to see, is that we're designating $250,000 a year to be used for autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicle demonstration projects. So that's going to be the capital aspect of those projects, but we believe that will help seed and kind of really provide a test bed of innovation within our urbanized area. So that's something we're proud of. Go to the next slide. And if you have any questions at any time, please raise those virtual hands, or Mr. Chair, of course.
Yes.
At your lead. Another key topic here is the adoption by reference. So there are some instances within this long range planning process that we're including and adopting elements of other plans by reference into our plans, because those other plans have already been adopted by their governing board or operating kind of executive. So we have, for instance, our strategic intermodal system, SIS, you may have heard it called, and this is really a program operated and kind of managed out of Tallahassee, which focuses on the state's most critical transportation infrastructures, corridors, hubs, and in those connectors. They do have a 2040 SIS cost feasible plan, and that's what we're adopting into our plan here. FDOT is in the process of updating their 2045 SIS plan, and once that is completed, we'll be bringing that back to our advisory committees and board for consideration and kind of a modification into this plan. Same goes with our toll partners. The Central Florida Expressway Authority is currently, or really just kicking off their ITS and larger system master plan, which will include, the full range of expansion and technology projects. They should have that. I believe that's starting up soon and should have something completed by the end of next year. So once that's complete, adopted by their governing board, again, we'll bring it here for your consideration. Locally funded projects are another example. MetroPlan Orlando's domain is really under the federal and state funds. That's what metropolitan planning organizations are for. But as it relates to locally funded projects, as part of the long-range planning process, it's important to include those, to acknowledge those, because it really is a full transportation system, and we cannot just analyze and plan for that federal and state higher level network in a vacuum. So that provides context. It provides an understanding of the level and type of investment at the local level and how that feeds into the larger network. So those are some of the considerations and just kind of nuanced aspects of the long-range planning process there. Go to the next slide, please, which is our project lists. So like I said a couple moments ago, previous plans only had a couple lists, and they were just roadway widening projects. So you have an I-4 widening list, you have toll widening list, and then you have a national or state highway system widening list. And the only types of projects you would see were widening projects. But it's a new day here, and we followed a very different planning process, that one that we're proud of and really is a state of the practice process. So you're going to see a multimodal lists, which provide a full accounting of all of our federal, state, and local funds. So what I'm going to do in the next slide is talk about, if we can go to the next slide, please, our budget allocation. And these are not the most attractive tables and slides. I do apologize, but I believe it's important to explain how they are to be read. And we go to the next slide, please. Every budget allocation table, so when you look in our cost feasible plan, we have those 9 to 12 lists of projects based on funding eligibility and funding availability. So every table at the very top has a program description and an accounting of available resources based on our plan years. So we have really three plan years, and then our existing transportation improvement program. So you'll see projects in the transportation improvement program in that first band, and then our first plan year for this long range, for this metropolitan transportation plan, is 2026. So that first plan period is 26 through 30, and then we have 31 through 35, and then 36 through 45. Our last band is 10 years, kind of as we look at the cone of uncertainty and the probability as we get later out in the planning process, it opens up, and that's why we kind of band and target projects in this manner. But at the very top, like I said, this is an accounting of available funds by source. We can go to the next slide, which identifies something that's really important to the long-range planning process, which is preparing project costs in present-day values. So in that column, you will see how much a project based on long-range estimates would cost based on each phase. So project development, planning, design, right-of-way, environmental work, construction, and what we call construction engineering inspection, which is an element in process, a construction management process. But each of those phases is included in this, what you see here in the red box, based on present day values. But if we can go to the next slide, what's important, and also a federal requirement, is that we use what's called year of expenditure. And this is us applying inflation rates to present day cost to acknowledge that the future is going to be more expensive than it is today. So what that does is we're discounting or we're inflating costs. And what that means is, as we wait longer into the future, our transportation needs list becomes a lot more expensive. And as we look into the 2045 band, it's 100% cost increase, a little over 100% because it's a 2.0 inflation rate. But we can go to the next slide, which is, as we start reading these lists, again, the top of the list is a ledger of available resources, total resources. And then as we start drawing and exhausting funds to program these projects, there comes a point within every plan period where we run out of funds, available resources to fund the next phase. So what you see here at the bottom is you'll see that after we fund the preliminary engineering, the right-of-way, and the environmental, we do not have enough funds to complete that construction aspect of that project. So what we're doing is we're rolling those funds forward to the next plan period and picking up where we left off. And that's where, and as you read these tables, they're read left to right. And as you will see, costs will increase based on inflation left to right. The last slide here, as it relates to budget allocation, if we can move forward, please, is about cost feasibility and unfunded needs. Again, there comes a point in the time in the project list, through 2045, our financial projections, where we do not have enough funds to complete our long list of needs. And that's what you will see on most tables. There's a break point where projects go from cost feasible in plan period 3 into the unfunded needs column. And this is, in some cases, phases of projects are funded. So a project is what we call partially funded. And then in other cases, everything below that red box is actually unfunded. So as you read these tables and we talk about cost feasible projects, ones we can afford, and unfunded needs are those projects that we do not have enough projected resources to be able to implement within our planning period. So that's budget allocation, year of expenditure in a nutshell. Like I said, these are federal requirements, and we do our very best, to account for our funds to ensure that, we have a, full accounting of revenues and project costs. Go to the next slide, please.
All right, Alex, if you would, if I could interrupt.
Please.
Go ahead and take a breath, get a sip of water. And if anybody has any questions, and if you don't have questions and you're asleep, especially if with our new folks, this is all coming at you from a fire hose here. So if you have questions, great time to ask. Alex, when you're ready, man. All right, questions, raise your hands.
I'm looking down the list, Mr. Chairman, and I don't see any raised hands at this point.
All right, somebody's snoozing then. So Alex, when you're ready, go ahead.
Certainly. So now we're going to kind of dive into the list, and I'm really just going to provide really a brief overview of each list, some of the highlights and what I think are key takeaways. But, I do, ask you to take a look at these lists. And in the top right corner of each of these slides is the actual cost feasible table that I'm speaking about. So this one, our first list, table 6, really is what we call our interstate or strategic intermodal system list. This, as I mentioned on my previous slide about, FDOT's strategic intermodal system 2040 cost feasible plan, was updated a couple years ago. They're currently updating that plan. So these project lists or cost feasible projects are subject to change. So that's just an important acknowledgement here. But what we are currently showing as cost feasible based on the information that we do have available, consistent with, the existing SIS plans is I-4 Ultimate as we know it, Kirkman to 434, the project that's, been underway for a few years and really coming along. That's cost feasible, obviously, but there's availability payments based on the financial plan that will be through the life of this long range plan. That's encapsulated here. Based on those SIS plans, we also have the phases north, 434, kind of the northern ultimate section, what they have, it's been called beyond the ultimate, but it really is just kind of the ultimate configuration to be determined. 434 and beyond. Similarly, that southern ultimate configuration, Kirkman to the Osceola County line. There's also segments in Volusia and Polk counties, but that's outside of our planning boundary. But acknowledgments as we coordinate with our other MPO partners as part of the Central Florida MPO Alliance. We can go to the next slide, please, which is our national or state highway system list. So if you looked at our 2040 plan, this list was widening projects, widen 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8. I think we had a few amendments along the way that included some complete street or some context, where we had context sensitive type projects. But we with that end in mind, analyzed this program a little differently. And what you'll see on the cost feasible list is a variety of project types. So you'll see complete streets type projects. So these are projects that are focused more on safety and, and pedestrian and reliability improvements. We also have those operational improvements where we know we're having reliability issues today and are only going to be aggravated into the future. We identified safety improvements using crash data. That's very new to our long range planning process. We always considered safety, but then identify and target specific projects in the near term to improve those issues. You have technology projects. So that's with our, ITS type project, Intelligent Transportation System. Laura will talk about that a little later on in her congestion management process discussion. But what we're doing here is investing in projects that allow our partners to actively manage and monitor the transportation network, which helps with reliability, helps with safety, helps with evacuation and other emergency response. And you'll also see widening projects here. There are instances, that we still do need to widen. This is not just a widening plan, but we do have roadway capacity projects that are cost feasible. And as you can see, a couple of highlights here in Osceola County, the John Young Parkway project, Pleasant Hill to Portage Street. That's a high priority for the county, where that project's widening with an urban interchange or a flyover that will that will actually bridge the intersection there, and a couple other examples, in Longwood, out in the attractions area, in the kind of the Silver Star, Pine Hills area, as well as in downtown Orlando, the Robinson Street project that DOT led a study on a couple of years ago is cost feasible, as a complete street. So if we go to the next slide, please. And I also, would be remiss if I didn't bring it up, Mr. Mayor, that the Maitland urban interchange is cost feasible as part of this process in some of the latter years of the plan, but a cost feasible project. So with that being said, I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we identified off-system capacity needs. So this was looking to our local partners, where are their widening needs based on future growth and impacts. So we've used, portions of our other arterial funds to fund only the construction and inspection phases of those projects. So we're going to be working with our local partners over the next few months and years to make sure that those projects, early phases of those projects are advanced to ensure that we can spend the funds that we have allocated in 2026 and beyond. These are a key list of highlights there. Something to acknowledge, though, you'll see there's no unfunded needs in this category. Within the entire plan, we've allocated $298 million. So basically, as we spent those funds on those top priorities, any remaining priority was really just kind of cut and pasted back to the locally funded project list, where these projects would traditionally be funded if we didn't have this special funding program. So if we go to the next slide, please, it is our Transportation Systems Management and Operations, TSMO, an Intelligent Transportation System list. So this is our list that focuses on efficiency, reliability, safety, and in most cases, the focus is within the existing kind of configuration. So we're not adding right of way, it doesn't require kind of the big study, but these are high impact, relatively lower cost solutions that improve safety, efficiency, and again, reliability. A couple highlights here is again the mention of our autonomous connected and electric shared vehicle demonstration project. You'll see that across the budget allocation table, across every band year, based on the annual allocation. Those programs are actually going to be coordinated annually with our Transportation Systems Management Operations Advisory Committee. So our board does have an advisory committee with all of our local engineers, traffic engineers, and other kind of interested parties. They'll be managing and we'll be coordinating those funds through those partners. So in early 2021, we'll work, with those advisory committees to start identifying candidate projects and start working on programming those in the next fifth year of the work program. A couple other projects, key highlights are on the screen, but I think what's notable here is the significant shortfall in unfunded needs versus revenue. And this is just an acknowledgement that, we have a lot of constrained corridors that we really need to focus on to, creatively solve the challenges that we have, whether that's through technology, whether that's through safety. But because of this plan took such a robust look, that's why we have so many unfunded needs. But we also pulled in needs from our ITS master plan, as well as, the connected and autonomous vehicle, our CAV readiness study, and that's where the demonstration program actually came from. But each of those needs and cost feasible projects are located there in table 11. So we can go to the next slide, please. So complete streets, this is, again, not a list you would have seen in previous plans. It's something we're very proud of because we already have a prioritized, as part of our prioritized project list, these are the categories. So, as we move forward, it'd be a very simple transition from this 2045 plan to update some of our shorter term planning products. But what we have here are those context sensitive type projects. And what we mean by that, these complete streets projects are not widening. It's an acknowledgement that we're going to go in, study the issues, and come up with a solution that is supported by the community, but also, solves the purpose and need of the investment. And a couple of highlights that we have here, the East Church Avenue project, again, in Longwood, Corinne Drive, MetroPlan Orlando has identified the funds necessary to implement that project. So that's the Complete Streets project that you probably heard presentations on probably last year. We also have the Altamont Springs North Street project and Osceola County, the Buenaventura Boulevard project. Many others. So I do suggest, taking a look at Table 12. But there is, we're only able to fund about 50%, give or take, of our Complete Streets needs. And again, that $203 million is based on the board's allocation, 32% of our urbanized area funds to Complete Streets. So again, unfunded needs and a list of cost feasible projects. We can go to the next slide, please.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a hand if you'd like to entertain
Certainly.
a question at this
Oh,
point.
please.
Alex,
Please.
Go ahead.
Ms. Mathis, if you will unmute.
Good morning. If we were going to identify the projects that affect specific municipalities, what would be the best way to go about that? You've made reference to municipalities in your presentation and also in some aspects of the slides, but where would we be able to kind of pull together a complete list of which projects would affect certain municipalities?
Yeah, so we're actually going through the process right now of updating what we call our GIS files. So these are our mapping files that we're able to create. And I'm hoping by the end of next week, I'll have all of those finalized based on these cost feasible lists. And then with that, we can kind of map those to kind of see, what lies in a municipality. But, also as we're operating kind of, cumulatively at the regional level, the focus of performance-based planning is not always, funding equity based on kind of geographic distribution of years past. It's about, solving for the reliability, safety, and efficiency issues that we have. As I'm listing projects, I'm just referencing them based on, my knowledge of the particular project. But, it's also important to acknowledge, as we make trips and we look at our origins and destinations, there are projects that impact your residents that are outside of your jurisdiction. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge as we're planning for kind of the larger region. But in the next week and a half, end of next week, I should have those GIS files ready, and we're going to be uploading those to our online data viewer. So then you'll be able to kind of zoom in, zoom out, see what's happening within your municipality and what surrounds it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, and Alex, a quick, just to give a little bit of insight into Jacinta's question. We had a couple of years ago, and Randy will remember in Winter Park, we put together a joint resolution, first ever actually, joint resolution between the cities of Winter Park, Maitland, and Eatonville about a widening of Wymore Road north and south from Lee Road to Kennedy. And there's already in the county CIP, the Orange County CIP, a widening of Kennedy from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, westbound to 434. And these are community altering, improvements that I'm sure that's what Jacinta has in mind. And we'd gone to some considerable effort to pull that off, and it presented that to Orange County. So these are monumental community changing improvements. So that's what she's talking about, I think. Right, Jacinta?
Yes.
Thank you. And as it relates, if I may, Mr. Mayor, to the Wymore segment, we do have that identified as a need. Wymore Road lead to Maitland Boulevard as kind of an operational and safety need, but it is unfunded.
I'm with you. Well, Jacinta's going to hit the community lotto anyway, so it'll be fine. We'll pull it off. Go ahead. Any other questions?
I'm scanning
ahead,
for
Alex.
hands. No hands.
All right. Again, at any time. So the next list, pedestrian, bicycle, and trails. Again, this is our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure lists. You'll see sidewalks, shared use paths, and in some cases, grade separated crossings, of active trails based on our board's allocation of our surface transportation funds, as well as our transportation alternative urban area funds. We have $108 million available 2026 through 2045. Again, substantial unfunded needs in this category, just based on the need and desire that we have for a very robust and highly connected active transportation system. What you'll see in the budget allocation table, similar to some of our other annual programs, is the Critical Sidewalk Gap Program, $1 million a year funded. That's going to be coordinated through our Technical Advisory Committee as an annual program. So we've identified those needs. We've begun the process of what we call bundling the projects, because with sidewalk projects, some of them are 50 feet gaps, 100-foot gaps, 1,000-foot gaps. So what we do is we identify those, try to package them up so they can be implemented or really procured, through FDOT's local agency program. We also have at the very bottom there, like I said, the school mobility program, but some other notable trail highlights. There's the E. Williamson, shared use path along E. Williamson. Multiple segments of the Shingle Creek Trail in both Osceola and Orange County are funded, and there's a variety of other trail shared use path and other types of crossing needs identified. Just scanning the hands. Go to the next slide, please. So regional transit. As Cynthia mentioned, a public desire, more places, more frequency. We went through the planning process to identify that. And the needs assessment that we went through, coordinated with links and our county partners, identified improved fixed route service opportunities, and new route opportunities, service improvements to existing routes, new premium corridors where service could be 10, 15 minutes, that type of highly amenitized frequent service, and of course operations infrastructure. You've kind of heard me talk about that, the necessity to have the capacity on the behind the scenes to ensure that the transit buses and systems operate efficiently, reliably, and stay well maintained as it relates to asset management targets. But as we look at available funds, and this is where you'll probably see the most dramatic shortfall, across our plan, is based on our federal, state, and locally projected funds. That's $2.45 billion, almost $2.5 billion between 26 and 45. That's a lot of need. That's a lot of funds, but we have a lot of other unfunded needs, over $7 billion of unfunded needs. So let me talk about what we can afford, as part of this plan. We can afford, and these are capital funds. I think that's also important to note, especially the funds that MetroPlan Orlando controls, primarily capital type funding. So what we can afford are new northern and southern operation bases for links. So that could be one likely in Seminole, one likely in Osceola County, to provide that regional kind of satellite basis so they can operate service more efficiently across our region, which you've probably heard Cynthia or I say this, is larger than the state of Delaware. So pretty large service area to provide high quality transit service. So they're doing that very lean manner now, but we believe those operation bases will help them improve their efficiency. We can also afford to expand the parking locations at the 3 Sunrail sites listed: Meadow Woods, Tupperware, and Poinciana. And it's in MetroPlan's kind of work plan for next year to study those sites, to kind of understand what are the issues, but we can afford, or what is this kind of scale that we need, but we can't afford the capital right of way and construction for those sites. Well, what we can afford, and this is not like the great news, and it's not really something that I'm happy to see, but what we can afford is fixed route service at existing operations. So that's what is cost feasible as part of this 2045 plan, based on existing financial resources, federal, state, and local. We can afford fixed route service as operated today, considering inflation. So, we are considering that year of expenditure, which does, again, discount our available revenues in the future. But either way, that's part of the planning process. Same thing goes with Sunrail. We can afford Sunrail as we know it today. If you look at the service schedule based on our estimates of future costs, that's what we can afford based on our available revenues. And then you'll see the caveat at the bottom. We have enough capital funds to fund a phase 3 of Sunrail, so enough to kind of get the train to the airport, but not the operations and maintenance funds to provide the kind of O&M match. And the same thing goes, we have capital funds necessary for links to provide some service enhancements to the existing service, some things that they have planned as part of their transportation, or rather transit development plan, their TDP. We have the capital funds necessary to make those happen, but again, not the operations and maintenance aspect for those projects. And that's sometimes the challenge with the funds that we have. We have a significant amount of capital funds, but as it relates to operations and maintenance, those functions are typically locally funded.
Yeah.
So those are found in table 14 and 15. Go to the next slide, please, which I believe is just a brief overview of what's been local again. So this is local funds, again, adopted by reference. One thing that I do want to note here, and I thought I had an updated slide, but we did 2 forecasts for our local funds, an existing forecast, which is what we adopt as part of our cost feasible plan. So these are sources, local mechanisms that are already levied and in place. So we can kind of perpetuate those into the future, or assume that those will continue on into the future. But just imagine what our local partners have in place today. And how that relates to transportation kind of revenue generation. So what we have here, and at the very bottom, and the correction I do want to make is we have been coordinating with Orange County, and we did report this incorrectly. It's not $234 million available. It's closer to like 1.7 billion. So we do I do want to correct that. I thought I had an updated slide in there, but for the record, Orange County does have about 1.7 billion dollars available, and those are revenues from their impact fees and from gas tax collections, gas tax receipts. That 234 was an estimate that only included a portion of impact fees. So again, we've coordinated with Orange County and their budget office, and we have those updated forecasts. And when we present our the final draft of the cost feasible plan to our board in December, it will include those updated financial projections and what that means to their project lists as well. So, but as you can see, even with that, there's still a significant need for additional revenues, to accomplish and complete the level of investment that we need. So, I can go to the next slide, please, which is my final slide, I promise. And it's really, a quick summary. So again, by the numbers, 24.3 billion plus another $1.5 million. So we're at that about 26 mark. If we include those updated local revenues from Orange County, 26 through 45 into the future. Serious unfunded needs, though, irregardless. So we still have a really robust vision for what we want in the future, but based on existing resources. Taxes currently levied. This is the current picture that we're in. And this is, part of the long range planning process. As we go through this visioning exercise, we identify what we want, we seek what's most important, we prioritize based on what's most important. But, based on that, based on our vision, our desires, our needs, and our existing revenue sources, we have, over $15 billion set of unfunded projects. And that's other important note on that, because those are some shocking numbers. A large portion of those funds and unfunded needs are actually toll projects, toll funded. So that's outside of our kind of our kind of domain, still part of the process, but it is a different system governed by the Expressway Authority and governed by FDOT. So but still part of the process. And those are unfunded needs, irregardless, which have absolute impacts on our ability to travel around through into other regions in the state. So with that being said, just the notes at the bottom are really our takeaways. And then these are kind of just emphasizing what Cynthia said. This planning process really did give us a different set of needs, something that, gives us more than just a widening lists. And based on our needs assessment and some of our targeted funding programs, you do see projects in there, especially safety projects, operational projects, sidewalk, kind of critical gap projects would have never been funded under our traditional planning process. But based on what we heard and what we think is important, we're identifying funds to accomplish these performance targets. So appreciate your time. As always, and the next time I promise it'll be brief and I'll just focus on changes from now until then. So thank you again. And I believe this is like my 83rd presentation this year. So it has been a fire hose, and I apologize by giving you so much information every time, but we appreciate your participation. And like Cynthia said, we would not have been able to do it without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. This is, I can't, and all of us can't thank these folks enough to come forward with some comprehensive visionary plan that can help us become more of who we would like to be here. Questions? Anybody have any questions of Alex?
Is he going to come up with the funding shortfall?
Yeah. Alex, I'm sure has a question for that, or has an answer for that, right?
Well, our financial resources tech memo number 5 does identify statutorily available funding sources that are available to our local partners. So, I'll leave it at that. The opportunities are available to local partners, but it's really the will of the people as we look at seeing those ballot initiatives through. So, I'll leave it at that.
So transportation surtax in Orange County is a big one. But any other questions? John, any follow-up? All right. Again, these guys did, Cynthia and Alex and the working group have done a magnificent job putting this together. Very impressive. Now, Ms. Laura, you want to share with us some of the challenges of congestion management?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor McDonald. Good morning, committee members. So I'm going to wrap up our presentations today with the final presentation on our congestion management process update that we have been working on for much of the year. The CMP is going to be adopted along with the MTP, presumably at our December meeting. Next slide, please. So today's presentation, I'm going to focus on sort of these last 4 actions in FHWA's 8-action process model that we've been using to help us develop the CMP update. The second half of the process is where we took a look at our existing system, determined where there are issues that are affecting congestion. We identified sort of the toolbox of potential strategies for mitigating those issues, and then we've come up with a set of recommended strategies that should be considered for implementation to help us meet our congestion management goals that we're all familiar with at this point. Next slide, please. And speaking of those goals, today I'm going to briefly review the various types of analysis that we performed for each of the goal areas that are shown here, and what the findings were. And then I'm going to go through the strategies that we're recommending as part of the CMP update to help us improve both recurring and non-recurring congestion in the region. Over 30 performance measures were identified in support of this congestion management exercise, which I presented on a couple of meetings ago to you. And so we took a handful of those performance measures to evaluate them and help us determine where there are existing issues that are either causes of congestion or that are impacted by congestion. And so I'll sort of review those briefly. Next slide, please. So starting with our safety and security goal area, we know that safety continues to play a role in congestion levels throughout the region, particularly non-recurring congestion. And so we wanted to get a feel for where there were issues that could impact that non-recurring congestion, and what types of roadways were really experiencing those types of issues. So on this slide, we're showing our top 25 segments in terms of total crashes for both fatal and severe injuries. And so for the top 25 fatality related segments. Those are shown in the blue. What we're seeing, not really any surprises here. Primarily the types of roadways that had the highest numbers of those crashes were our sort of limited access, interstate type facilities, and then some rural principal arterials. And then for the top 25 fatality plus severe injury crashes, which is shown in sort of the darker green, the majority of the roadways that were in that top 25 were our arterials, our minor arterials, our principal arterials. And then sort of the lighter green just shows where there's overlapping of those two segment types. Next slide, please. So in addition to looking at the total crashes, we also looked at our top 25 segments in terms of crash rates. And so for the total number of crashes, top 25 segments are shown in blue, and then, are shown in green. And then the top 25 segments for fatal and severe crash rates are shown in the blue. And really for both of those measures, the types of roadways that we saw that were in those top 25 segments were our local urban roadways and major collectors. Next slide, please. Moving on to reliability and performance goal area, what we focused on here was just identifying areas within the region that had the most unreliable travel times. And we've showing that here, showing sort of this heat map type of graphic. And the areas that are in the dark pink, which we've also boxed for you, those are the most unreliable areas in the region. Again, not really any surprises here. The most unreliable areas generally correlate to our downtowns, our entertainment districts, and some of our high employment areas. Next slide, please. For the access and connectivity goal area, we sort of evaluated 3 different things. We looked at transit and car access to some key destinations, to activity centers, and then we also looked at bicycle and pedestrian access to some essential services. So on this slide, we're showing car and transit access within a 20-minute travel shed to some key destinations in the region, including our 2 airports, some of the major attractions, as well as the convention center. Sort of a busy graphic, but really the takeaway here is that our transit access within that 20-minute travel shed is really limited as compared to where you can get with a car. And we sort of boxed in those areas. It's sort of the darker green shows where you can get to within a 20-minute travel period. And so we boxed those in for you. And then if we go to the next slide, we also looked at, in addition to those key destinations, what's the transit and car access to activity centers. And in the lower right of the slide, there's sort of the list of the activity centers that we looked at and evaluated. So there's sort of more green on this map just because we looked at more activity centers, but really the takeaway is kind of the same. The amount of area that you can get to within a 30-minute travel time period is really limited as compared to car access. And so, what that means is, for convenience sake, people, if they have access to a car, are generally going to drive rather than take transit. Next slide, please. So then the final evaluation that we did under our access and connectivity goal area was access by bicycle and walking to our essential services. And so we defined essential services as grocery stores, markets, restaurants, public parks, government buildings, schools, and healthcare. And what we found was that about 24% of the population has access within a 10-minute walk or bicycle ride to that list of essential services that I just rattled off. And then you can see sort of the geography-wise where those areas are that have that 10-minute access to those services. And you can see that it doesn't really cover much of our region. So we have some work to do there to make bicycling and walking to essential services easier. Next slide, please. For our health and environment goal area, what we looked at was the system-wide air quality index. So the air quality index is an index for reporting the daily air quality, and it uses a scale that runs from 0 to 500. You can sort of see in the bottom right of the slide. That scale, the higher the AQI value, the greater the level of air pollution, and the greater the health concern. So as noted on the slide, an AQI under 100 denotes good to moderate air quality with little potential to affect public health, while an AQI value over 300 represents a hazardous air quality. Sort of as a point of reference, the AQI for some of the large swaths of California and the West that have been ravaged by fires recently, I've been looking, and the AQI was frequently above 300 in the mid 300s.
Wow.
Here in Florida, the AQI values are rarely greater than 100, and we've actually never officially had an AQI value greater than 200. So an AQI value of 100 generally corresponds to the National Air Quality Standard for a pollutant, which is the level that the US EPA sets to protect public health. Here in our region specifically, over the analysis period, which we looked at 2015 to 2019, the AQI never went above 100, and our average was right around 50. So thankfully, we're in good shape on this particular goal area. Next slide, please. And from our investment and economy goal area, what we looked at was an analysis of the reliability of some of our regional visitor emphasis corridors. How we define those visitor emphasis corridors was a corridor that carries 60% or greater visitor traffic, and that's based on the visitor study that FDOT completed last year. So for the visitor emphasis corridor, there's sort of a scattering of unreliable segments clustered around the key destinations that I mentioned earlier, and they're also highlighted in pink on the slide. The exact causes of the congestion isn't necessarily known, but some contributing factors are most likely due to oversaturated conditions and points of conflict like intersections and driveway densities. Next slide, please. So that wraps up sort of the evaluations that we looked at just to get a feel for what congestion looked like in the region, where there were issues, what issues were impacting congestion. And so the next several slides, I'm just going to talk about our recommended strategies. And we've developed sort of 3 buckets for improving congestion. There are some strategies to improve safety conditions. There are strategies to optimize system capacity, and then strategies to promote a mode shift away from single occupant vehicles. So starting on this slide with our strategies to improve safety conditions, what we really wanted to focus on here was trying to focus on reducing the occurrence and severity of crashes and to decrease the incidence of that non-recurring congestion. That's a congestion that's generally caused by traffic incidents, by major events. So some of our recommendations include expanding our notification systems to utilize variable messaging signs, mobile applications, and connected vehicle technologies so we can implement queue warning systems, dynamic detours, that sort of thing. We're recommending expanding the use of integrated corridor management to help redirect traffic for major incidents and events. We've seen lots of great things come out of that program thus far. We want to advance the role of predictive analytics in assisting with incident management. Just a shout out to what's happening right now. MetroPlan Orlando is currently partnering with UCF and FDOT District 5 on a pilot predictive safety analytic tool under an FHWA grant that we recently run. The tool that's being developed aims to enable faster crash identification and response by using predictive information and visualization of current traffic conditions enabled through CCTVs. So the goal of the tool is to help improve safety, roadway safety, and reduce congestion by reducing the duration and impact of crashes, and therefore reducing the likelihood of secondary crashes. So stay tuned for updates on that. And then the other pot of recommendations under this improving safety conditions came from our countermeasures that were identified in the bicycle and pedestrian safety action plans that were completed last year. And some of those recommendations include improving lighting where needed, looking at some speed reductions or nighttime speed reductions in certain areas, considering additional bicycle lanes where appropriate, and then also potentially a driver and cyclist education campaign. Next slide, please. So our next bucket of strategies are those to optimize system capacity. We sort of have the system that we have, and so if we can make it work as efficiently as possible, that will hopefully help us with some congestion. So looking at our freeway management strategies, some of the ones that we're asking to be considered include ramp metering, which is actually currently planned to be a feature on I-4 once the managed lanes are operational. Further consideration of managed lanes elsewhere in the system where appropriate, with a caveat that managed lanes doesn't necessarily mean tolled. We can look at things like truck-only lanes, BRT lanes, reversible lanes, express lanes, etc. And then also sort of interchange improvements where we can improve bottlenecks. On our arterial system, we're recommending continuing the signal retiming program that's been really effective for us to date. Expanding the amount of actively monitored system so that we continue to use technology to improve the flow of vehicle traffic and improve safety. And then also looking at intersection improvements where necessary to reduce bottlenecks or just to improve the sort of operations at various intersections. Next slide, please. Some other strategies under this optimizing system capacity bucket include freight management, where we're recommending increasing the reliability on truck routes and improving connectivity to major freight terminals, but also looking at developing some curb management standards so we can address congestion related to vehicles making deliveries. For our automated, connected, electric, and shared vehicles, or ACEs. We know that connected and automated vehicles in particular have the potential to improve traffic flow. So we're recommending that several of the recommendations from that CAB readiness study that we adopted earlier in the summer be prioritized so that the region can benefit from any of the safety or operational efficiencies that those vehicles can offer as we start to see their numbers increase on our roadways. And as Alex mentioned, to support these efforts specifically, we have that new pot of funding identified in the 2045 MTP to support ACES demonstration projects. So we're excited about that. And finally, we're recommending that the region really harness the power of big data to help us improve how we process data to recognize patterns and needs, and also to help us really emphasize traveler information systems so we can share information about delays, incidents, weather, travel times, etc., with the idea there being that a more informed driver is going to help us result in more efficiently utilized roadway capacity. Next slide, please. So our final bucket of strategies relates to those that will promote a mode shift from single occupant vehicles, with the idea being that if we can make some other modes more efficient, convenient, or safe, we can reduce the number of cars on the roadway. So some of the strategies under this bucket include developing some travel demand management specific strategic plans related to telecommuting and first mile, last mile options, building awareness and motivation around TDM strategies such as active transportation management, adapting roadways to be more accommodating of all users, including advancing complete streets concepts. And Alex noted there's some more funding buckets to do that. Improving our local street connectivity and the accessibility for our walking and biking to essential services. I think that closing the gaps on our sidewalks program that Alex mentioned will really help there. And then finally, expanding the capacity and connectivity of our public transportation system. This can include both supporting links and Sunrail efforts to optimize their route structure, hours, and frequency, where we can find funding to do so, but also looking at how we can use technology solutions to improve access and convenience to links in Sunrail, including expanding trip planning capabilities and making them more user-friendly, and also moving towards a mobility as a service model with a single account system available across modes within the region. Next slide, please. So those were sort of all of the strategies that we're recommending within the CMP. And this is my final slide, and just wanted to remind everyone that the CMP really is a living document. And so twice a year, we'll be going through and compiling any new available data so that we can update our performance scorecards and see how we're moving towards the targets that we've set for each performance measure. We will be compiling those into some sort of report or presentation that we'll give to the board and committees semi-annually. And then annually, we'll be preparing an annual report in concert with tracking the trends. And within that report, we'll be talking about sort of some of the strategies that have been ongoing throughout the past year and which ones we're seeing some fruits from. And then every 5 years, we'll be doing this process all over again and looking at everything sort of wholesale, reassessing and adjusting our goals and objectives, and considering if we want to use the same performance measures, add some, delete some, and then identifying new strategies and targets. And that is all I have for you today, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, anybody that has any questions, please use the raise hands button and unmute yourself and have at it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm scanning for hands. I don't see any currently.
All righty, everybody. Thank you. Ms. Balk always does a great job with her presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Several items under general information at tab 6 in your agenda packets. Anybody have any questions?
I don't see any hands, Mr. Chairman.
All right, hearing none. Our next MAC meeting will be on December 3rd. As we heard earlier, this is likely to be another virtual workshop. Now, our next MetroPlan Orlando board meeting will be November 18th and will be a hybrid meeting with some board members, staff, and members of the public attending in person, including me, and other board members, staff, and members of the public attending virtually on Zoom. Anybody have any thoughts? Do not be bashful.
Mr. Chairman, just before you adjourn the meeting, we have been using this particular meeting as a test and a pilot for what that hybrid meeting of the MetroPlan Orlando board is going to look like. I don't want to impede member comments or the public comments, but we have some members of our staff who are in the MetroPlan boardroom right now. I'm not sure if you all have seen that view on your screen, but we'll have them in just a moment. We want to do some audio checks with those of you who can stick around for about 2 to 3 minutes, if you don't mind, at the conclusion of this meeting.
A dress rehearsal. I love it. Now,
Miss Virginia might be one of my TIP requests.
we can
Okay.
practice, John.
Exactly.
If any members of the public wish to comment, please use the raise hand function and you'll be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll unmute your mic. After you are recognized, please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 2 minutes or less. Do we have any comments, it appears, Miss Virginia?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have any raised hands for public comments.
Oh, I don't know how in the world we didn't generate some serious excitement with this. Any written or phone comments? So there was none of that either, huh?
We didn't receive any comments prior to the meeting either.
All right. Okay, I'm going to beg all of your indulgences for a moment. And while we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting, let's go ahead and do our dress rehearsal right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And for those of you who can remain for just a moment, Kathy, if you can go ahead and stop the live stream as the meeting has been adjourned. And then we have some members, again, of our staff who are in the boardroom.
You wanted to test that one, right?